Olivia. This is AV Club, where I talk about horror and literary fiction. And today I am doing a horror book review of Wake Up and Open Your Eyes by Clay McLeod Chapman. I have been a fan of Clay McLeod Chapman for years. I have read most of his books, including Whisper Down the Lane and Ghost Eaters. I even reviewed the remaking on this channel years ago, which is, I think, still my favorite of his. However, I was really taken with Wake Up and Open Your Eyes. Wake Up and Open Your Eyes is a I guess a response to the current daily horrors that we're all living in. It follows Noah Fairchild as his family has been overtaken by a 24-hour entertainment news network called Fox News, which is a thinly, if at all, veiled reference to Fox News. If you're outside of the US and you're not familiar with Fox News, yeah, it's this 24-hour network that gets its awesome ratings because it lives to be as stimulating and watchable as possible. One reason why people are so engaged with it is because it wants to make people as angry as possible and get enraged. And to do this 24 hours a day, you don't have to just present news. You have to make up things and make people enraged at all kinds of things, both real and taking unreal positions on it, as well as things that are just completely invented in order to make people mad at the wrong people, to get people as outraged as possible, because outraged people are a lot easier to control. So we're seeing this currently in the US with these made up issues about migrants and trans people and all kinds of queer people and people of color, when there are real issues going on that people aren't happy, that if you were on this right wing side, it's so interesting because you're both supposed to reject big media, which is, I guess, everything but Fox News. So to fill in that void, you are both turning to Fox News, or if you're a younger generation, you can find people that will pick the same targets as you, online, in all sorts of online niches. And that is really what Wake Up and Open Your Eyes gets to the heart of. I was going to read this book probably no matter what, just because he is a favorite horror author. And then whenever I learned that it was about Fox News and propaganda, it was very intriguing, but I wasn't sure how I was going to gel with it politically, just because I do think that part of the issue in the US is that there is this culture war between the right and the left, and really not about right and left politics, but really like a culture war between being a Republican and a Democrat. And if you're not one, then you are the other. And then there's people like myself who are not either, very far left of both parties, because they're both right wing parties, center right wing parties. And you know, so I feel like I have this perspective that, I am outside of it in a way. Um, but I do think that there's clearly very real right wing fascist horrors to deal with, but saying that it's a Republican Party rather than looking at the kind of global culture war issues is a mistake. So I wasn't sure how I was going to gel with it politically. However, I don't feel like he let me down. Story wise, it really starts off with a bang because it brings you to actually the culmination of everything that's going on. That there's a great awakening that the rest of the book is building towards, and you start there. Introduction is that things have already gone way off the rails, and that you are not going to have to wait around to see what's going to end, but it's a truly mayhem. Um, this character has gone to he has kind of an estranged relationship with his parents because they have gotten so far right wing and just wrapped into this like Fox News like outrage culture. Um, but he is going to see them, and they have been truly hypnotized and taken over, and really the stuff that is happening in this book is disgusting. And I like that it starts there. I like that it starts with mayhem and just really vile. There's this is like his most graphic book that I am aware of. um that it's the closest to extreme horror at times, just because of the degree to which the vileness, especially like in descriptions of like sex and fluids and the destruction of the body and gore and taboo, that this is the furthest I've been aware of him going, and it is kind of nasty. It is, I mean, it's really nasty. And I like that it starts there and I like that it gets there, because what we're dealing with in reality is stuff that's very nasty. I think that I would have been much less impressed if it was a palatable way to talk about the real things that are going on right now. That what we're seeing on the TV is so upsetting. Like, if you are seeing a genocide happen on TV and then your response to it is like to shame a political party. No, it's both parties that are allowing this to happen, and it's something that's more both more personal and more global than than I think a lot of authors would have taken this. And I think it also makes sense to start there because it kind of is just a heightening of what is, is the underlying feeling to what we're having to live through every day. And so it would feel fake, I think, to start things on a normal note and then build to a question mark. I like that you know where the story is going, but at the point that it switches away from Noah and his parents, it switches over to mom and a dad and two kids with a teenage son and a child. Actually, I'm pretty sure it's his brother, because he's talking about it's talking about the ways that these insidious ideas can develop in different ways, that his brother is also starting to he would have never considered himself a Fox News watcher, but then he gets fed up with how other people are talking about things, and kind of the liberal sense of things, talking about things that things are okay as they all are, that we don't need to take any action, that nothing needs to change, it just needs to not get worse, but everything's fine as it is. And people do not feel like it is fine as it is. And so whenever you're given this alternative and he starts watching Fox News, and it gives him some sort of stimulation, because it's agreeing with his viewpoint that, well, there are issues. And then they just give him a solution for the issues. Like, okay, well, maybe it's migrants or maybe it's queer people. And he gets sucked into Fox News that way, which also has this kind of like hypnotic propaganda property inside this text. Um, and there's this current refrain to just wake up and open your eyes, that everyone's been lying to you and we have the answers, and if you'll just wake up and open your eyes, then you will you are one of the few chosen that really sees things how they are. And it's a gratifying feeling for people who feel disempowered to be told that they're seeing things as they really are, and everyone else is just, isn't quite as keen-eyed as you or as discerning. And so he gets into this right-wing propaganda this way, whereas the mother feels kind of disempowered in her family, that she is seen as just the person who's just supposed to cook and clean, and she doesn't really feel great about that. And she goes to a yoga class and runs into a kind of crunchy influencer type of character, and from there, like, eventually starts watching her on YouTube and gets hypnotized into this way too, and is like learning how to do all of these kind of, is kind of like an anti-vax kind of character, to be really crunchy and to purge her family of toxins, and these new diets that they need to do that will make them whole again, that there's something wrong with them and that they need to fix it. And then the teenage son feels disempowered, and in the way that all teenagers are, that you don't you both have responsibility and no power to do too much about that. And so he gets into, um, he finds it very appealing to get into things sexually online, and feels upset with himself over that, and gets into this kind of like self-hating cycle where it's then the only thing that feels good. And he doesn't feel man enough or attractive enough, and falls into right wing groups online on like a Twitter analog. Um, and then the youngest child is the only one who has not gotten um, kind of brainwashed in this family, because he doesn't have a screen, is like kind of the example that's been given, is that everyone else is like on their phones all day, and that they're not participating with their family, that this like screen time is really the way that they're getting any kind of connection in the world. And it's this uh, cycle that they can break out of. The story, because it shows you how far it's going to go, the story is more about the horrors of how this happens, and thinking about connections to the real world, that you do see that Fox News is very addictive for some people. And there's many occasions of people being like, I went over to my grandparents' house and the Fox News logo is burned into their TV because they never turn it off, and it just sets into their TV. And you see that on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok, whatever, that right wing stuff really takes off. And we don't we don't know, because also the developers of these algorithms don't exactly know why stuff is getting shown to you, that it's a black box of information, and that it gets better and better over time of showing you stuff that it knows you're going to watch. And this can be because it both thinks that it's you're going to agree with it, or that it's going to outrage you, or both. And so you see that there's research that shows that these algorithms are right wing leaning. I don't know. I was kind of surprised that I didn't feel like it was too close to home to read right now. I listened to it on audiobook, which I will say the voice acting in is incredible, and there's some more kind of audio direction and production that's put into the audiobook that I think makes it worthwhile to read that way. I will say that I enjoyed the book for the exploration throughout, because of how it opened, but then I wasn't as engaged with the ending that was given to this story. I feel like the ending was my least favorite part of the story, but yeah, definitely was not disappointed by this, and I think it does give some sort of catharsis. And I think that he's just a really thoughtful person, that I feel like, when what I'm saying with this culture war about Republicans and Democrats, you also see people group all of the South into this Republican write-off thing. If you are reading anything written by Democrats, liberals online, that they're like, can we just kick those states out because then our country would be perfect, ignoring the actual reality of the people who live in the South, and that we are not all the same. And I have really appreciated in Chapman's work before and in this book that because he's from the South as well, I think he's from Virginia, so a much different place in the South than Louisiana. Um, but he has such respect for the nuances to it, and really goes to show how frustrating it can be, and how frustrated it is to be Southern and be online and you see that everyone thinks you're stupid, and that there's nothing worthwhile that can come from the South, and how that could impact how the the only thing that's going to get us out of any of this is coming together and collective action and class consciousness. And if you're instead focused on these culture war differences, and this perceived like people are either with us or against us, rather than seeing what the actual enemy is, that it's a class enemy rather than a geographical enemy, that that's what's going to get us out of this, and showing that frustration that the characters see, that they are so disenfranchised from the rest of the community because people talk down to people from the South. And um, I just really appreciated that that was included in the narrative as well. It did remind me a little bit of the Handyman method, and especially how the hypnosis of the screen time worked, but it obviously went in such a different direction. But I am interested in seeing how people are interpreting the horrors of right-wing social media and putting it into works of horror fiction. I've also had been reading Wrecked by Alex Gonzalez, which I was reading the arc of, and I'm so bad with it. Is like whenever I get an arc on NetGalley, I'll get it months ahead of time, and then I'll be like, oh, I should really read this like closer whenever it comes out, so I can kind of review it and put it up right away. And then I forget that the arc is going to expire, and so I need to like find another copy of that now that my arc has expired. But really enjoying Wrecked as well, which is looking at the dark web, and I think exploring some of the ways that like teenage boys or young men can get drawn into these dark and violent parts of the internet, and how that's fueled. So I see that stuff like this is coming out. I'm definitely interested in reading more of it. So especially like this was the first time that I saw the kind of character of the crunchy right wing anti-toxins, anti-vax kind of character put into a book. And I think that that's something that will be really interesting to explore more of. So if you have any recommendations for me like that, I'd definitely love to read them. But I think that's really all I have to talk about right now. I think I would love to, I could definitely see this being adapted into um, maybe more like a mini series. Like I think it would be good like that. And um, I think that if you're on the fence about thinking like, is this going to be too much right now? I would say just go ahead and read it and try it out. I did see that reviews are like, wow, this book is like graphic and it's kind of nasty. And it's like, yeah, the real stuff is nasty. Like, there's nothing nastier than actually convincing young men to be school shooters, and like all of this just horrible anti-migrant, anti-trans, anti-queer rhetoric. Um, that's the nastiest thing that there is. This is words on a page. It's not real. So that was my little soapbox for today. So let me know what you thought if you've read this. And yeah, if you have any recommendations for me of more books in this vein, then I would definitely like to read them. So leave me a comment, let me know what you think, and yeah, I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.